Hello and welcome to Conversation About Coaching, sponsored by the LCMS Coaching Network. And we're here to help folks to understand coaching and what coaching does and who it's for. And we pray that it would be a blessing. And I'm here with Heath Luehmann and Joshua McArthur. Hi, guys.
Hey,
Hello, Scott.
Good to see you. Uh, Either one of you go first and just share a little bit about yourself and your background and your coaching.
sure. Well,
You
I'll
bet.
start.
Go for it, Joshua.
Thanks for having us on. This is great to get together and talk about coaching. And I do a couple different things for a beverage company. Some of it is coaching and internal work on our company culture, and I also do some finance stuff for them. And then I have a small business on the side too for like leadership consulting and coaching that I'll work with different clients on different things they're facing. So working on a couple things, but it's great to serve people in these different vocations I have.
Great, thanks. Heath.
Nice. Yeah. My name's Heath Luehmann, and I have been in coaching for a couple years here, doing leadership coaching as well. Went through the Townsend Institute to get the training and everything. That's the background. And I work mostly with leaders around, how to develop their skills for being better at work. I really love the teamwork aspect and the the chance to weave in spiritual formation whenever possible too. Like, what is God saying? How is God a part of the conversations? But not always. There are also some just kind of corporate work where you're working with people and you're doing it in the background, but it's not necessarily what you're talking about. So both things are really good.
Yeah, great to have you guys. And want to talk a little bit about what coaching is. I don't know about you guys, but I constantly run into folks who kind of have an idea of what coaching is, but you can tell pretty quickly that they don't quite get it. And so, probably like both of you, there's this constant effort to describe it, explain it, even demonstrate it, so that people uh, come to a clearer understanding. Let me just give you a for instance. Last week, I was talking to a pastor, and he was saying that you're a coach. Well, what do you coach? And I said, well, it's a helping skill. And, I went into some explanation, but he kept saying, well, what do you coach? Um, and then it hit me. Oh, I think he thinks that coaching is instructing someone in something and helping them to do that something. And he's not quite understanding that coaching is a helping skill in and of itself. And so, you know, then when I had that thought, it moved the conversation forward where we could talk about it. But at first, I was just kind of missing him because he wasn't necessarily clear about at least what I was thinking of when it came to coaching. Um, do you all run into that at all?
Oh yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were confusing it with like counseling.
Mm,
And it was interesting because they were like, "You'd be a great therapist." And it's interesting because like catharsis can happen through coaching, but that's not the main goal of coaching, and it's also not necessary. It's more goal oriented, rather than necessarily like making somebody feel good.
mm,
Which is why, like in coaching, a lot of times you end up challenging the client in different ways, but you've built a relationship to where kind of how hard to push and what that looks like. But like you're saying too, I think a lot of people get it confused with mentoring and wanting to are you going to tell me what to do and stuff, and it's that's not what we do. But people get confused, and sometimes they're kind of like, well, what are you really about? What are you going to actually do here if I try to work with you? So I think it's important to clear it up, and it's interesting. Heath, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. I would say the confusion is definitely there. I have a fellow coach that came up to me and said, "Do not ever introduce yourself as a coach. Don't just leave it hang there like that. Say, I'm a leadership coach, or I'm an executive coach, or I help people grow in these different areas, but don't ever just say I'm a coach because people will not know what you're talking about and they'll assume the wrong thing, like whatever they want to assume, but it'll be wrong."
Yeah. So what do you guys say when they say, well, what do you mean by coach? Do you have some kind of sentences or things that are, front of mind that you go are sort of your go-to in explaining coaching for folks?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I try to lean on is the idea of like a partnership, and recognizing that the client has expertise in their discipline, and I respect that, but I also have expertise in helping people grow and asking questions that are kind of going to kind of nudge them to think in a different way about things that are going to help them accomplish what they're trying to do. Um, because I think like for example, like with mentoring, I think people will confuse that of like mentoring is great, but that's going to be somebody who's kind of been down the path. So like for the context of pastors, like you could have a pastor who has been a pastor for a really long time, and he's down the road, he's seen a lot of things. And so if you have a newer pastor that's going to be mentored by him, he's going to say, hey, watch out for this, like do this. And it's a different kind of helping thing. I'm not a pastor. I haven't, been down that route. So I can't really offer that to a client, but I can ask them questions. They're going to help them grow and think about things in a different way. Because ultimately, even if you have a mentor that's been there, like you're a unique person, you have unique challenges that might have some nuance that even the mentor maybe doesn't know. So equipping that client to be able to take ownership of what they're doing, that can be a really helpful thing that some of these other disciplines they just don't offer. So I don't know. I think it's great that people have all kinds of different people that are helping them grow, with their challenges, but trying to point out that nuance is, don't get confused. Like I'm not going to tell you what to do, like because I don't know that,
Uh-huh.
and I think that's something that's really powerful.
Yeah, I like that idea of partnership and how it's different from other helping skills. It reminds me of sometimes I say, well, I ask questions that you probably wouldn't ask yourself. And so then that helps you to think about it in a different way or a new way or remind you of thoughts that you'd forgotten. Um, how about you, Heath? What do you run into and what's your approach?
Yeah, well, both of you guys said it already, but asking questions, I think, is the key to coaching. And if you're going to say, asking, helpful questions, asking those open-ended questions where you're not attached to, as a teacher, and you're saying like, well, what's 3 plus 2? Like, you have an answer that you're looking for. When you're a coach, you're asking the question, and the answer could be almost anything, and you're open to that, and you're going to grow no matter what the answer is too. I think you can naturally help someone by just having a conversation, but it's more intentional than that because you just get this marginal benefit from having a conversation with someone else because you're kind of trying to get something out of the conversation, maybe information, maybe some insight, maybe something else, but you're just getting a little bit. If both people are focused on one person benefiting from the conversation, like it's exponentially more awesome of a conversation, and you get kind of stuck in these well-worn paths. Like I always tend to do this, like I think about this and then I do this, and I always think this way. And when someone else is just asking you those questions to kind of get you out of your ruts and think of
Mm.
like, wait a second, what else is going on? I mean, that can open up tons of possibilities. And when you're both pushing the same direction, you can go really far.
Yeah, those ruts. That's interesting. And I don't know about you guys, but I often run into people who are thinking about coaching for the first time, and they describe their situation as being stuck. that they've tried different things, they've tried what they think they know, and they just don't know where to go or what to do. That we're blessed with this internet that has so much information out there that you can kind of Google just about anything to get an idea or something somebody else has tried. Um, but when that fails, you're kind of stuck. And so, where do you go? Well, a coach. They can help you get clear about what you're really thinking, about what you're really dealing with, about what really is getting in the way, and then help them think of things that they haven't thought of before. Kind of connect the dots and come to that aha realization that, oh, and then they often say, why didn't I think of that before? So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So coaching is, and I think we've all is said it so far, a helping skill. Um, and it's helping people, as Joshua said, be goal oriented. Anything else you would add to that definition, either of you?
Well, one thing too is you're talking about this idea of like being in a rut. It's interesting because a lot of times people end up seeking out like help for something because stuff has gone wrong, like either for themselves or they're really sick of the being in a rut. And sometimes they don't know it, but then things get so bad where they're like, okay, like I need to figure out how to do this or I'm tired of it. And that happens with people with like therapy. It can happen with coaching too. And I think sometimes that's where people get confused. And it might make sense to touch on this too is, I mean, the way I think of like therapy is, people that are kind of, they need help for something, and it might be clinical or it might be something like trauma related or something that's particularly like damaging, or their emotions are so caught up with it that they can't really move forward. And so, I mean, coaches need to be aware of that and say like, hey, like, you need a therapist for this particular issue.
Sure.
But coaching, when I say like goal oriented too, like, most of the people that I work with, like they're very high functioning. They are really good at what they do and they're trying to build on that, and they have ambitious goals and they're trying to kind of continue to grow, not in a way of like necessarily seeking healing, but they're trying to just be the best they can be. Now, with that said, too, there's plenty of people that have like a great work or career, but their personal life, people sometimes split things off. So it's not uncommon for people to see a therapist and a coach, for different aspects of their life or what they're going through. But some of that stuff is outside of our scope of what we do as coaches. And so recognizing that. And I think that's one of the reasons why people sometimes like might not see a coach, because they're like, well, I don't really have any problems. And well, sometimes we deal with problems and can come in and can help from that perspective. Like there's a lot of times like trying to optimize things and prevent problems from even occurring in the first place, and making sure that like, your energy is like that you're just getting better with whatever that looks like. So it's a more proactive approach, I think, generally. Unless stuff has just gotten really off the rails, which sometimes can be tough because then you're really kind of behind the ball on some of this. But it's interesting.
Yeah, coaching clients, if they're stuck, if they're in that rut that Heath talked about, can be really discouraged. And that's one of the things that a coach can bring is that sense of affirmation and confidence for the person being coached when they don't necessarily even have that for themselves. And continuing to encourage them to think it through, to express their thoughts, and then along the way, those insights and awarenesses can come along and really give some clarity about what they should do moving forward, so they're no longer stuck. Um, what's all this bring up for you, Heath?
Yeah, I was thinking too. I like the idea of proactive, like you're trying to get ahead of it. You're trying to say, where do I want to go? And if you're thinking about like the difference between what does a therapist do or a counselor do versus does a coach do? At first, I didn't like the idea of like a fitness coach, being a coach, but actually, that's probably really good. Like if you're sick, if you are unhealthy, you'd want to go to a doctor because they would bring you from unhealthy to now you are in a normal, healthy kind of situation. But if you are going to a fitness coach, you're saying, how do I go from healthy to thriving? And I think a good fitness coach isn't going to have the same answer for everything. Like, here's the exact program that you're going to do because this is how you're going to get what you want. A good fitness coach is going to say, what do you want? Like, do you want to run a marathon? Not everyone wants to run a marathon, but some people do. Do you want to, look like Arnold Schwarzenegger? Do you want to live until you're 90? Like what is your goal? And if you're asking them what their goal is, then you can say, yeah, I've got some ideas, some questions, some things to kind of get you there, but you're taking people from doing well to how do you help them thrive?
I love that. It's super custom to what the client wants and what they need. And to your point too, it's interesting because there's some people that continue to seek a therapist partially because they think that that's the only helping profession there is. But one of the problems with that is if you keep going to see a doctor and you're not really sick anymore, it's like, okay, well, you need somebody else to help you, just to move forward. Because sometimes what happens is in therapy, not everybody, does this. There's plenty of different therapists, but sometimes they want to keep revisiting that and helping you grow, and it can lead to rumination upon rumination, which isn't healthy. So one of the things that's really helpful with coaching is creating a plan. And that can be really encouraging in and of itself because you're like, hey, now I have a goal. Now, like I've sat down with the coach and we know a plan, like we're going to do this 360 feedback to get feedback from people, in my organization, or I'm going to sit down and be really thoughtful of what I want. And then you're partnering with the coach to then do that. And so you can start making progress, and that in of itself can be really helpful. Whereas it can be really frustrating if you're seeing a therapist and you're like, okay, we keep thinking about the same thing over and over again, but like, I want to move forward. I need a shift. But to be clear, like sometimes it depends on the person and where they're at. Because there's for sure a place for therapy, when it's needed. But if it's not needed, coaching, mentoring, these other disciplines can be the thing that really can help people.
Yeah, we've been touching on it a little bit, and maybe it's would be helpful at this point to kind of shift the conversation to ask the question, how does coaching differentiate, or how is it differentiated between coaching and the other kinds of helping skills? Or what makes coaching different from the other helping skills? Perhaps that's a better way to ask the question. Um, just before COVID, I went to a meeting of I live in South Florida, and went to the South Florida chapter of the International Coaching Federation. And the president of the ICF was there. And one of the members, you would think that they would have already known, but maybe they were newer or just unclear, or maybe they wanted to get a good answer for somebody else. And the question they asked her was, what's the difference between counseling and coaching? And she said, well, counseling takes you from a place of, you know, uh, being less than, being in a hurting state and coming to a normal state. And coaching takes you from a normal state to being more productive or better able to reach your potential. Um, so, what have you guys heard, or what have you guys shared when people have asked that question? What's the difference between uh, counseling and coaching?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think with a lot of it is like therapy, it's healing. And
Mm,
that's its goal. With coaching, it's the goal is whatever the client's goal is, and whatever they outline. And sometimes like a client might have a goal that's outside of my scope or what I can do. And so then it's like, okay, well, I got to refer you to somebody else, or, whatever that looks like. But it's more so about like problem solving and improving different things. And there's so many different kinds of coaching. There's life coaching, there's fitness coaching, there's executive coaching, there's team coaching. And so it looks a lot of different ways, which is, it's kind of tricky, because then you ask a client like, well, where's a pain point, or what are your goals? And let's like try to explore and talk about if that's something I can even serve you in. And that's one of the hard things to sometimes get over, because a lot of times people don't really know what they need unless things get really bad. And then you're like, okay, like, yeah, that is dysfunctional. Like, this is a unhealthy environment, and so it's kind of tricky. But I think simplistically, that's probably what I would say is therapy's main goal is probably to help and heal through that route. But coaching is more goal oriented, and trying to help them elevate and grow.
And there's
Heath, what
probably some overlap there. Yeah. How about you, Heath? What thoughts come to mind?
Yeah, if someone is clinically depressed, or if they've got some, something that they're battling and they're saying, "Can you help me?" Like there's a specific path that's going to help someone who's got a clinical depression diagnosis or something like that. And that's not me. And I can be totally honest with that. But if it's someone who's saying, like, I just don't always feel happy. Like it's not that like dark, heavy, like there are things that are broken, but it's just like I feel like there should be something more, and I'm not sure what it is. Like, you bet that'd be a great spot to be able to work with you, to be able to ask some questions, be able to figure out, what is it that you're wanting, and get clear about that, and then how do we get there?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And how about another one? Mentoring. Joshua, you brought up mentoring before. Can you just retrace that a little bit quickly? What's the difference between, mentoring and coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main value of mentoring is that somebody's already been where you're trying to go. And so because they've already been down that path, or a path very similar to it, they have insight and can give advice, or can like help you in a way that a lot of other people can't, because they've kind of been there and done that. With coaching though, it's more so of, hey, like, I haven't been down this path you're trying to go either, and so I'm going to walk alongside you, but like, I'm not on that path, and so I'm going to ask questions as you kind of navigate that and figure it out. And I think both are really helpful, and both have a place. The thing that excites me about coaching and taking that path with somebody, of being a partner, is I think it can help somebody grow even more, because it forces them to think. Now, it might be slower, because I'm not going to say, hey, well, okay, do these things, but it might end up being more sustainable because I'm asking them the questions, and they're growing. Now, if they're doing that and they have a mentor also, and both things are kind of going on, like that could be really cool, because they're getting advice that they're trying to weigh, but then a coach is also recognizing the client on whatever path they're trying to go down, and helping them figure out, the nuances and how do they grow as they move along. So I think there's a place for both, but that's kind of how I would think about it. And there's things that mentors can do that coaches can't, unless it's a mentor coach, which is that's a thing too, even for the coaching field. But then people, if you have a coach that's already been there, and that can be tough, because it can be tempting to then start telling somebody what to do. But that's not what coaches do. At least you're supposed to not avoid trying to tell people what to do. Even if you have the best idea, it's like, well, I'm not going to try to nudge you in that direction. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to let you wrestle with those questions, and I'm going to, support your growth in that way. So that's how I would think about it. What do y'all think? What other like aspects of that do y'all think
Yeah,
about?
I think if you know exactly where you're trying to go, I think a mentor would be someone to search out, because they have been there, they know what to do, they know Like if you want to visit New Orleans, you would find out someone who lives in New Orleans, who knows New Orleans really well, who would be able to tell you all the different places in there, to be able to say, this is the highlights, this is what you should know about this place. And you'd want someone that knows it really well. But if you're like, I'm not even sure what I'm looking for, like I just want to travel and explore new things, but I don't know what I'm trying to see. Then you want, more like, I don't even know, the guy on PBS that, that like travels all over the place in Europe and stuff. And but you need someone like that that just loves traveling and understands, like, well, I haven't been there either, but we can ask questions and we can enjoy the experience and know, how to get there well. And that's almost kind of what you're looking for. Not someone that necessarily is an expert at you know one specific place, but someone who's great at the traveling. Unless you want to go to one specific place and like, nope, I definitely want to go to New Orleans. That is the one place I'm going to go to. So then go find a mentor.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're both saying, and as I was listening to both of you, the thought came to my mind that being or being mentored is kind of having that tour guide, like you say, Heath, and somebody who can tell you, what they've been through and what they've learned, and so you get the benefit of their experience without having to experience it. Um, and sometimes you can take it or leave it because I don't know, maybe you might not value it, or maybe you will. Um, but Joshua touched on something that I think really is important, that in coaching, because as a client, you're being asked the questions, then you're going to be coming up with the thoughts and the majority of the ideas, and you're going to have some deep ownership in the solutions that you come up with because you wrestled with it, you thought it through, and you had the insight, or you came to that point of clarity, and it's yours. It's not something that you picked up from somebody else's experience. And even if it's not 100% the best, because it's yours, you're gonna go at it full bore. You're gonna try to make it work, because you've got some deep ownership and commitment to it, uh, because you came up with it. So any thoughts there, guys?
I think that's a good
Yeah,
point.
I go for it.
Yeah, I think that's great because I mean when I coach people, it's tricky, and this is why it's important to clear all this up because sometimes I'll coach people and they're like, "Hey, tell me what to do." Like they want, they're like, "Oh, you're here to help," and I'm like, "Yes, I am here to help, and I want to help you." But I also like the way to help is to help them engage and to come up with ideas that they're excited about that they want to do and engage. Like Heath, like you were explaining, like the idea of like a fitness coach. It's very similar in this way too. Like I can't do the work for my clients. Like I can't. They got to go to the gym. They got to lift the weights. They got to run. And so I can help motivate them in a sense of asking them the right questions and stuff. But ultimately, they're the ones that have to really want it. And and when they really want it, cool things can happen, and I can help kind of ask the questions, guide them and do this. Hey, and keep them accountable. Like, hey, you wanted to go to the gym. Why didn't you? What got in the way there? Let's talk about it. Not from a place of judgment, but from a place of, hey, I thought we agreed that this was a goal you had. And I thought we kind of backed this out and figured out like, these are the things you need to do. So I'm just curious, like, did something change with your goal or did something get in the way? Or is there somewhere you need to grow around these steps? Like, is that maybe not the right thing? Like, let's adjust this. And so that's something that I really like because um, it's really helpful. It's helpful for the client to get to the bottom of things and say, you know what, this is what's really going on, either with me or with the situation or with my goal, as opposed to me saying like, just get to the gym, just like go do it. Like that's not really going to help. Like with most people, some people want that, but with a lot of people, you know, it's better to take that approach where you're asking the questions and trying to be curious about, you know, why they're doing what they're doing or why they're not doing what they're doing. Um, yeah, Heath, what thoughts did you have? I know you were going to chime in maybe, but
Yeah, I think even if you're coaching, if you're mentoring someone, then you kind of know like, well, this is how you're going to get there, so you better do it. So, kind of holding someone accountable, this is what you said you're going to do. The coaching side of it kind of says, okay, this is what you wanted to do. And if they come back and they're like, I didn't do it at all, you still have the question of, well, let's figure out why, what got in the way, what got stuck. I was talking to one person about how to hear God's voice more, how to pay attention to what's going on, and I said, well, do you believe God wants to get your attention? Would you write down like what's one thing, if the God of the universe cares about you as an individual, you could write down one way that God was trying to get your attention each day. Do that for a couple weeks. And then a couple weeks later, like, so how'd it go? Like, didn't do it. Oh, well, maybe that's not really important to you then. So what is important? Like, what are you really looking for? And it's not like you hit a dead end because there's something else there that was still worth exploring, still worth going into. And it wasn't what they originally thought.
Yeah.
yeah, coaching is like innately adaptable to the client, and it's inherently flexible and client deferring. It's like whatever you want. And Heath, you mentioned this earlier on too, is like, a lot of times in a normal conversation, both people are trying to get something out of it and they're kind of jockeying for whatever. People have agendas in coaching. Like it's outlined that my agenda is my client. And that's really powerful. Like you said, it amplifies that conversation in a way other conversation relationships don't. Because I've said, hey, for this hour, I'm focused on you and we're going to go where you want to go with this thing. And some people aren't really comfortable with that because they're like, well, I've never had anybody, offer that to me before because I've never really thought like that. Which, is a cool thing to offer clients. Um, yeah.
Yeah, one thing I'll just throw in there is, you know, we're all part of LCMS Coaching Network, and so oftentimes, especially when we're coaching Christians, part of the agreement at the beginning of the coaching relationship is, hey, we're both Christians here, so you know, we're not going to coach people in order how to sin, but we will coach them in what we agree that, you know, uh, Jesus is our Savior and we want to grow closer to Him. We want to serve Him faithfully. And so, it's not like the agenda is wide open to do whatever you selfishly want. And I know that you all know that, and that's how you do it. But I just, for somebody who might be listening, the other thing I thought that was really helpful that one of you said uh, was that a good coach, to use that weightlifting analogy, a good coach doesn't do the heavy lifting. They're not trying to fix it and solve it and to come up with the right piece of advice, but they're asking the questions so that the client can do the heavy lifting. That is to say, the deep thinking and the talking it through out loud. And as they hear themselves talk, becoming more aware of the things that they say, the things that they're thinking, the things that they want, and yes, the awarenesses and insights and ideas that come along the way. And the coach can facilitate that, but it's the client, to use that weightlifting analogy, who's doing the heavy lifting. So, what does that bring up for anybody?
That was probably actually the hardest thing about learning to be a coach was to do less. Because I absolutely wanted to fix it for him. Like, hey, I'm gonna take notes over every word you said and then inspect it and try to understand it and then try to solve the puzzle so I can give it back to you and then you I mean, that's not what coaching is. I mean, it is about being the container, being able to hold whatever the question, the concern, the problem is, and let them do the heavy lifting, let them do the work. And when you're able to do it, it's less work for me, but it's way more successful for them because they're able to take ownership and they actually believe in the answer.
Yeah, the outcomes matter for sure, but sometimes the process is more valuable than the outcomes, because you leave a client to think about something, and it's like, okay, like we could have maybe tried to solve this and be solution oriented right here and right there, but like if they're in this process where they need to think through this thing, like they're going to come up with a solution eventually in their own time in a way that's going to be something that they really are committed to, as opposed to like we were talking about the mentoring thing, like, hey, well, you just got to do this. It's like, well, maybe that's what they need to do, but if they're thinking about this and they're growing in that process, like that affects how they make decisions. It's going to affect their ownership. And that's really hard to do because a lot of times you're like, like I'm having to bite my tongue because I want to give advice. That's so tempting. For some reason, it's so tempting to try to give advice. Um, and you know, yeah, yeah. But refraining from that can be really valuable to a client and saying like, you know what, I'm not going to do this yet. And Scott, I mean, you kind of brought up the idea of, ethics and morals and stuff with coaching too, which, I think is interesting. Cause sometimes you do have to speak into stuff, or and so it depends, but that's where like, there's kind of an art to this whole coaching thing. Like there's science behind it for sure. But it also is a very, you know, unique thing of like, you have to make decisions. What do you say? What do you not say? Is it appropriate to take off your theoretical coaching hat and say like, hey, I'm going to step into this other role just for a second. And then we can kind of go back to that, whether you're like consulting or something. So it can get kind of tricky, but that's why having like strong morals and integrity and all that's important, because you're trying to help people. Um,
Well, and
so it can get
sometimes
kind of
those those thoughts that you have that you can share, as opposed to always, asking questions. Sometimes those thoughts that you share um, can be things that they can think about, and you can invite them into evaluating, and they can, in themselves, create new awarenesses. So there, might be metaphors or might be other kinds of illustrations that ultimately move people forward. Um, we've been also kind of talking about this one, but let's focus a little bit more deeply on the question, well, who is coaching ideally for, or who's a good candidate to be coached? How would you want to answer that question?
I think I've changed on that one, where before I'm like, like coaching is for everyone, and everyone can benefit from coaching. And like, I think that actually was a problem for me for a long time too. I got stuck with that. And now I am absolutely convinced coaching is not for everyone.
Hmm. How so?
Coaching, coaching is for someone who is motivated enough to do the work
Yeah.
but frustrated enough that they're almost on the brink of giving up. I think that is who is ready, and it's probably everyone in some area. But if you're not motivated, coaching isn't going to be helpful. Or if you're not frustrated with something, you're not going to do anything about it. So I think you need both of those things. And if there's an area, the subject doesn't matter. But I think you have to have that motivation and that frustration in order for you to be a good coaching candidate.
Oh, what an interesting insight. Yeah, Marshall Goldsmith, who's known to be one of, if not the greatest coach out there, says, don't waste your time on people who aren't gonna, really do it and work on it. And I think you really gave some clarity to that statement. So thanks, Heath. What are you thinking, Joshua? Who's a good coaching client?
Well, I mean, I think what Heath is saying and that realization is really key. And I would say, like, if you want the most value and you want to have the most successful client engagement, like the best ones I have, they fit that bill. Like they're very aware of like either the problem or frustration with themselves or how things are going. And they're also really motivated to make change because they want to do the work. I think I would say though that there's some people that are like, and we've talked about this a little bit, I think, is they're like, I don't really know. Like, I know something's wrong. I need to kind of figure it out, but I don't really know. And like some people are super clear on that, and that's great. And that, I mean, I love that because I'm like, you already have so much self-awareness and you're clear on this. Some people don't have that. I mean, there's things like we can do to help them figure that out. They still have to have the motivation. And so like a coach can help them see that, but they still have to be like, I want to grow. I maybe don't know what I want to do or how I want to grow, but like people grow and people change. And so if somebody recognizes that and they're like, you know what, that's true. And I want to be proactive, but maybe I'm in a state of dormancy right now. Like a coach can still, maybe help them out. Now it does make sense to say like, hey, if this isn't working or, this just isn't a time for coaching right now. I think that makes a ton of sense. But I think for somebody though, if they're still like trying to wrestle with that, it can be worth having conversations to say like, okay, like, well, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What are you, even if you're in a state of dormancy, like, what do you envision for your future, like either career or your church or whatever, like stuff's maybe smooth sailing right now, but like, what are you thinking about maybe that could be coming down the line? So there's still a way maybe to be proactive, but this idea of like not wanting to waste your time, on clients that either are not very enthused or don't want to do the work. Like that's one of the most frustrating things is having a client that doesn't show up wanting to work and engage. It sounds interesting and maybe like it's wrong, but I think it's probably right, is this idea that like your client should be working harder than you do. You're working in different ways, but your client should be working harder than you.
Yeah.
Which it's again with this fitness idea of like, working out. Like if I'm coaching somebody in a gym, which I don't do that, but if I were, they're going to be the ones doing all the work. They're lifting the weights, they're running, they're sweating. I'm not, I'm thinking, I'm serving them in a different way, but they're the ones that are doing the work. So it's very similar. And if they don't want to do that, it's kind of like, what are we doing here? Like, let's either stop or we need to have a conversation about how do we get aligned and either maybe help them figure out what your vision is and get connected to what they're really wanting. I mean, yeah, Heath, I think your points on that are like really spot on, especially if because it's really encouraging as a coach to have a client that's like that. Like that's one of my favorite things, is to have a
Yeah.
client that's engaged. Like that's so exciting, and it's because I want the best for them and I want to see them grow. But when that's not the case, it's frustrating for everybody. So, if that's the case, sometimes you just got to walk your own ways. But
And it's
Yeah.
not that the fitness coach isn't working. Like the person lifting the weights is doing the heavy lifting, doing the physical, but the fitness coach is going to be looking there spotting to make sure that their technique is right, that they're not going to hurt themselves, that they're thinking about, are you actually working the muscles? Are you doing it the right way? Like in any coaching conversation, like I come out exhausted. And it's not because I'm talking, but it's because I am actively working as hard as I can in that conversation too. So it's a different kind of work. You're not working for them or like instead of them, but you are working on their behalf in a different way. Where you can say something, Scott.
Well, like what you just said, you're listening and you're paying deep attention to what they're saying, not just with their words, but with their tone of voice, with their pauses, with their emotion. And that takes focus and that takes effort and concentration. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised that you're tired afterwards. I get it. The other thing that I was going to say about an ideal coaching client is they probably need to have some skin in the game. Uh, you know, if you're always talking about it with your client about a third party, they might not be real motivated because, but it really has to come down to, well, what can they do? What what type of agency do they have as the client in the change that they're endeavoring to make. Um, and frankly, sometimes if a third party pays for the coaching, uh, they might not necessarily feel like they need to work that hard to get their money's worth. Um, but there's a reality there. The other thing that came to my mind, and I was reminded of as I was listening to you guys, is that probably, at least for me, I'm starting to come down on the side of thinking that somebody who's a real newbie probably isn't a good client for coaching. Whether it's because they're just learning the information, they're just learning the skill, they're just learning. There's so much foundation that they have to get. Um, Now, certainly, that new information, that new learning, that new experience can become more incorporated into who they are through a coaching process. But I think there's a place for the people who are brand new to try to absorb what's new, whether it's information or technique or skill. And then coaching becomes increasingly important as time goes on. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
I, I think my initial thought is like when you talk about like somebody new, are you talking about somebody like new to a role or new to maybe like a profession or something? Just to
Yeah,
be,
somebody who's just plain brand new. There's just so much of a download that they need
yeah.
to get started that you know, coaching can have a place as they incorporate it, but there's just so much of an initial download that they need that coaching might not be the right thing right then. Um,
Yeah. I mean, my thought is too, like with that, like having somebody who's really new, the biggest challenge probably for them is probably like change management.
mm,
So a lot of like a coaching conversation in that regard, I would probably frame up in the context of change and how
there
do
you
they
go.
incorporate that well,
Yep.
which is very different than focusing on the skills of delegation or things like that. So there might be opportunities there, but I think they're gonna be different.
There you go.
Um,
That's great.
but that's kind of my initial thought.
Yep.
Yeah, I might land in the same area where I'd say even someone new, like I'm thinking back to when I was a first year teacher and right out of college, trying to work with kids, trying to do all that. If I would have a coach that was willing to sit down and listen to me and ask me questions about how I was doing things, I think even like I may not have been able to absorb all the wisdom of someone that's been down the road of teaching and understanding all that. But I think the presence and you get little snippets of that with colleagues and stuff naturally. But I think having someone that's really focused on me would have been helpful in a different way.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit different. I do really agree with the idea that they have to be invested in the coaching somehow. And I've been asked before too, like, hey, wouldn't you just do this for free for people that in a nonprofit because they don't make much money anyway? Like, why don't you just give it away and help these people? And the thing is that it's not any good if you give it away. Like if they don't have skin in the game, they're not motivated. It's they have to be willing to invest the time and energy into moving forward. And if there's no financial, investment either, it's usually not going to be very good. So even if it's a reduced rate or something like that, like I'm willing to work with people, but I think they need to be invested in it so that they're motivated to actually do something and hit their goals, meet their target.
And
That's
Scott,
good.
I will say too, the idea of like coaching, somebody who's really new to the field or that they're just beginning versus somebody who's more experienced. Like I will say that coaching somebody who is higher up in an organization, more experienced, I do think there's more impact to be had there. Maybe not necessarily value for the client, but there's more impact. So like if you're coaching somebody that's higher up in an organization, by helping them grow and be a better leader, that cascades throughout an organization. And so their impact is more impactful because they're going to affect more people and they can have a more positive impact. Thinking of like coaching somebody that's lower in an organization, like they might have a smaller sphere of influence, I suppose, but they're going to get a ton of value out of it. Still, it's gonna look different. So in terms of like trying to make the biggest impact positively for an organization, the higher up you can coach in that and get alignment, that's going to benefit everybody. This is like from an organizational perspective. Um, so I think that's maybe the nuance I would say there, which I think organizations should pay attention to, especially if they're paying for coaching. It probably makes sense for them to pay more to coach higher up in the organization rather than, oh, let's just coach all these people down at the bottom. It's like, well, you can do that, but you might get more value out of like organizational value and impact from coaching higher up in the organization, perhaps.
For sure. Yeah. I appreciate what Heath said about the first year teacher, where I served for 20 years and we had a school, and the first year teachers were always assigned another staff member, as sort of like a mentor teacher. But I can see where, at the end of the day, if you had a conversation with another teacher and you said complainingly, oh, the kids wouldn't listen to me. And instead of them telling you what you should do, said, oh, what happened? What did you say? What was the reaction? What else could you have done? Those coaching questions, that would have been rich. Yeah, that's helpful. How can coaching support pastors, lay leaders, volunteers, and churches to thrive? What are your thoughts there? Since it was your idea to ask the question, I'm guessing you have some thoughts, Joshua.
Well, I do, but I mean, I'm curious about y'all's thoughts too, because I think
Sure.
it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, initially, in the context of thinking about like coaching, I mean, you could coach anybody with the caveat of understanding Heath talking about like, you got to recognize, they have to have the energy and wanting to do it and actually engage it. But I think that comes into play in churches. I think churches are interesting because you have a lot of people in the organization that are volunteers that aren't paid. So, you really have to tap into what motivates people, and you have to pay attention to like what's going on with the vision. And so, in a sense, a lot of these things become more heightened for any nonprofit or a church. So I think that's something that I think about a lot is like you can't really rely on just paying somebody necessarily to volunteer and serve. If it's a massive congregation, you maybe have a large paid staff, but otherwise it's different because you're relying on volunteers. But I think part of it too is churches are unique just in a lot of ways. And a lot of this stuff I do too is helping people have difficult conversations and dealing with conflict. And I think there can be an idea in churches is that like, oh, well, we're all Christian. We don't have conflict. We don't need to really fight. Or if we do, we shouldn't or whatever. And so the reality is that that's going to happen. And sometimes in churches, it happens more and it can be really nasty. And so, having somebody who can coach and help support from a perspective of helping those relationships work and, get better, that can be really impactful, I think, for a church. So, I mean, coaching is relational, and churches are also very relational. Like they're built on that and on relationships. And so paying attention to that can be really helpful, especially when you're trying to get ahead of these things before they blow up or, they go sour. So those are my initial thoughts. I'm sure I have more, but that's kind of just a few things that come to mind. But what are y'all's thoughts of like the particular value there of coaching for churches, pastors, lay people?
Go ahead, Heath.
I think the phrase "it's lonely at the top" is really like standing out for me. I think there's a lot of isolation that people in ministry feel, and it doesn't matter if you're like the leader of the church, if you're like the lead pastor, or if you're the leader of the youth group, or if you're just leading a Bible study, or whatever leadership role you have. Like when you are leading, like you're almost you're disconnected from the group to some degree too, and it's just hard to lead when you don't feel that connection to people. And I I can't think of any leader who has not doubted themselves
Mm.
and just been in hard spots at different points in their leadership. So I think there's a misconception about coaching, like coaching is just for weak people, or coaching is just for the people that can't help themselves. And that is not true at all. And since learning more about like what coaching really is, the ICF credentials, the like how to be a good coach, like I have paid for coaching for myself, and I have grown so much through being coached and seeing, oh, this is like I couldn't see this myself. I couldn't see that, and not feeling alone in the work that I was doing and the things that I was trying to get done. So I think of the different ministry leaders, I think it would be so beneficial to be able to have people walking alongside you, looking at the ruts that you're getting stuck in, asking you questions so that you're able to find paths that you didn't see before, and be able to take new things and achieve more and build the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, lonely at the top. That's a good one. As I'm pondering that question, the things that strike me are, you've got your various boards and committees, and even staff members, and even pastors, that kind of do the same thing. Well, what did we do last year? And so we're going to repeat the same programs or activities or events, and well, we'll try to do them this year. And over time, the different people who do them change, or what changes the most probably is the context. And so the outcome, the effect of some of those things that we do programmatically in churches just change. They're not the same. And then you run into folks who scratch their head and go, what happened? Why is there nobody in church all of a sudden? Or why didn't anybody come to that event? It used to be so popular, or whatever. And having a coach there to instead of them getting together and casting blame or pointing fingers or saying, uh, coming up with an idea of why things didn't work the same or better or worse or whatever, having a coach come on and help them to debrief what happened, and then help them to think forward of they could do differently in the future, rather than just trying to quickly. People are busy, volunteers are busy, uh, just try to repeat the same thing every year, would be so much more productive, because you'd probably then be a little bit more, maybe a lot more sensitive to, who are we trying to serve? What kind of outcome are we trying to make? How can we involve newer people in this activity? How can we mentor younger people? Who can we give additional responsibility to help in their leadership growth? Um, where are you going? What do you have you been praying for? What's God's will for this congregation? All those kinds of questions um, can help overcome sort of that malaise of, well, what did we do last year? So that's what's hitting me. I don't know. What are you guys thinking?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Like the reality is that people change and grow, and so do churches and really any organization. And so, like being intentional about the change and how
Mm,
things are growing, like it makes sense to work with a coach to make sure that that change goes well. And obviously, too, sometimes churches they're not growing or they're struggling, and because stuff's constantly changing, and so then well, hey, how do you turn this thing around? How do you do things better, to where as much as you can influence it positively, because if that's what we're doing now, obviously there's a spiritual component to this, and the Lord is the one that gives our churches growth. And but the reality is too is that we're here doing things, that do make a difference, with the decisions we make. And so for a church to pay attention to that, like utilizing a coach as a resource, can be really impactful, to help them grow and change and solve problems, make things better. That's what we do. We do it in a different way than, some people, but we do it in a way that's, as helpful as we can be, through using coaching skills.
Yeah, and I really like the that word that you used, Joshua, intentional. Um, Rather than just sort of habit or repeating the same patterns as before, it's being intentional about what we're assuming, what we're choosing to do, and what outcome we're seeking, certainly by God's grace. Um, that's a great word. And the idea of having an external coach, um, who doesn't have the oh, what's the word? You guys help me out here. Who doesn't have, that
The bias.
connectedness? Yeah, that bias of being within the ministry or within the that context, and so they can be, more objective in asking questions that maybe were, elephants in the room before, but it would be healthy to examine. Anything
Yeah,
else? Go ahead.
I'll say something on that too, because I think it's really important. So at the company I work for, I do internal coaching, but I also do external coaching through my business. And so, I kind of do both. And one of the things that's interesting, especially about like having an external coach come in and support, is, I mean, there's no relationship like it, because that coach, they're not telling you what to do. They're not part of the system in the sense of like they're part of the politics. They don't really have an agenda. They provide a unique perspective. So there's so many important relations. So in the context of pastors, like their wives, super valuable, but they're also really embedded in the ministry, and they're married to the pastor. The board, they all kind of have their own thing. The president of the congregation, they have their own thing. A mentor, that's another, like everybody kind of has their own thing. But a coach that's externally, if they come in, they're not part of that. And so they can solely focus on asking the questions that help the pastor deal with whatever he's trying to deal with, which to me is really cool. And it excites me because there's nothing quite like it. And that's something that coaches can offer to clients as a major value add, while not diminishing any of the other important and impactful relationships that a pastor or other leader in a church can have. It's just a unique thing that we can offer to people, which is a really, really cool thing. So I'm really excited we're talking about all this, because I feel like it can make a really big difference positively to not just pastors, but all of the people that they serve, through their ministry. So that's something that excites me. But yeah, I mean, internal coaches are great too. It just gets a little more complicated. And it requires a lot more discipline from a coach that's kind of embedded in that, to say it takes more energy. I mean, we talked about that earlier with, man, coaching is exhausting, and it is. It takes a lot of energy. When you're internal, it's even harder because it's harder for you to separate yourself after you're coaching. If I'm coaching somebody externally, we have our call, I'm tuned in, locked in, we're doing this thing, we're done. I go and do my own thing. But like, if that's part of your, I don't know, if it's part of like where you go to church, it can be a little harder to separate from that. You can do it, but it's tough. So
For sure, for sure.
We talked about how coaching and counseling are different, but one way that they're the same is like the ICF rules are like coaching is confidential. Like you don't work with someone and then like, hey, that's free game. Let me tell stories to everyone else I know. And I mean, that is a huge benefit in itself. There are a few pastors that I will work with because I am not in their location. I'm external, kind of like what you were talking about, Josh, that I don't know all the different people, that they don't have to be worried about saying the wrong thing or offending someone, or I'm going to go back and look at them differently when I come to church and hear their sermon on Sunday because I'm not part of their congregation. But it's just this safe place to be able to think through, like I'm getting stuck here. I'm frustrated. This is bugging the heck out of me. Like, how do I do this better? And being able to be that safe, confidential kind of place for someone to give them that space to think through. And again, I'm not doing the work. I'm not telling them what to do. They're just needing that ability to have time and space to be able to figure it out and then be able to move forward is really powerful. So
Yeah, it can be the real difference maker, having a coach, as as opposed to a consultant or some other kind of expert come in. That's important. Well, any final words from you guys before we wrap up for the day?
I
I
didn't
had,
prepare any.
what's
Go
that,
ahead.
Heath?
I prepared no closing statement, closing arguments here, but no, it's been a lot of fun just being able to have the conversation with you guys and yeah, being able to talk to other coaches that are doing this work and um yeah, one image that came to mind too when you were talking as well is almost like the duck floating on the pond, and that's just like going across the pond. Like it looks like it's just sitting there, but its feet are working like the dickens underneath the water to like paddle across and I think that's a lot of what coaching is. And so that image stuck with me. And then yeah. So it's been a lot of fun working with you guys. So thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I enjoyed this. I'm really glad we got to do it. Coaching, I love it. I'm all about it. I think it's a skill that is particularly impactful for people that are trying to grow and um, wanting to be intentional to stuff. It's like, there's all kinds of things going on. And I mean, the idea of being intentional, I do think that's true because like there's stuff going on regardless of not if you're dealing with it. And so like when you're ready to start dealing with it, coaching makes you look at it, and like, okay, like let's not be passive here. Like this is what's happening. Like we know, let's talk about it. It's confident. Like so it's a really cool thing that can make a big difference for people that are wanting to try it or to use the skill and like give it a go. So I love it. It's important to keep talking about this stuff. And as a field, it keeps changing and there's all kinds of different coaches that have different skills and, ways about doing it. And I don't know, it's great to like talk about this stuff with you guys and hear y'all's thoughts and just kind of work through it. So thanks for being able to do this.
well, thank you guys for coming on. And for anybody who might be listening, go to lcmscoaching.com and go to the directory, and you can see some more information about Heath and Joshua and their coaching niches and where and how they can serve, and you can reach out to them. So thanks so much, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.